part of what the new paradigm is the awareness that the spiritual is real. I mean, in mainstream medicine is the only system of medicine in the entire world that does not invoke higher power and mystery. It's the only one.
Well, I think the reason that science hasn't really explored these questions is twofold. One is that there has been a significant conflict, if you will, between spirituality or religion and science over the last century, really, where people have really come to look at religion and spirituality as kind of this falsehood and as delusional and in a very negative way from the scientific perspective, and having nothing to do with what science can show. But I think what's happened is that not only have people realized that science does have something to say about spirituality and that we can utilize science to help us understand what the spiritual sides are of human beings. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that as our science gets better, we're able to ask more interesting and more complex questions. So 15, 20 years ago, we couldn't ask a question about what goes on in the brain of somebody when they meditate. But now we have the techniques and the ability to explore that kind of issue. So on one hand, science is developing to the point where we are having the ability to ask these kinds of very complex questions about these very unusual experiences that people have. But there's also a realization that there may be more to these experiences than what we have typically thought of, and that science and spirituality may actually have something to say about each other.
A very great spiritual teacher, Jesus said a long time ago, the kingdom of God is everywhere. People don't see it. It is everywhere. This non-ordinary state of consciousness exists within us, and that is what we fundamentally are.
Descartes invented dualism to avoid the problem between the church and science. And ever since, science and spirituality have been on separate paths. And in fact, consciousness and science were on separate paths for much of this century due to the behaviorists. It's only been the last 20 years that consciousness has come back into science. Can spirituality come back into science? I think it can. I think only recently have we got a framework to understand spirituality. For example, this level of the fundamental space-time geometry, which includes or can include Platonic values of good, aesthetics, beauty, pure truth, as well as feeling, emotion, plus the fact that it interconnects all of our conscious entities or proto-conscious entities with other beings and with the universe itself. This interconnectedness, this timelessness, I think is the beginning of a scientific understanding of spirituality.
So what the scientists and what the mystics are talking about are not just parallel realities. They are really one and the same investigation. It's just that scientists have been investigating the material realm, and the spiritual traditions have investigated not only the material, but also the vital, the mental, and even the supramental, the domain of love, justice, these archetypes, which Plato investigated long time ago, even in the West. So that's the difference. Now we have extended our science to not only contain what the scientists have traditionally investigated, the material, but also the mental, the vital, and supramental, and consciousness itself.
At a fundamental level that is even difficult to observe, there's one God self that is all of us. We grow from that. The whole universe grew from it, and each of the separate personalities that appeared have grown from it, with the illusion that each one is a separate individual, but actually we're all from the same tree.
Entanglement is a new idea because it's arising out of science. But the concept of a connected universe is as ancient as we know. I mean, like the fundamental principles in Eastern philosophy is that everything is entangled. But they didn't use those words. But that's basically what the models are from Eastern philosophy. So, you know, we have that as a historical basis for these kinds of ideas. It's called words like cosmic consciousness or collective consciousness. And the new part is that science, through very different means, has encountered this aspect of the world and is now beginning fairly rapidly, actually, to learn the nature of it.
We are at the end of the paradigm. We're at the finite stage of the sensual paradigm. There's no more paradigm to have in the senses. We can modify the paradigm within the box of what's already been created sensually, but the borders are at its extension.
It's a very weird time. right now, because East has met West. There's a lot of flowering of ideas, and many of us who were asked to grow up in one paradigm have to switch to a new one, and that is very tricky. For myself personally, I can experience both paradigms. Sometimes I experience a beautiful blend of both, and sometimes I just get up to the new one, fall back to the old. I think that maybe we're the only generation that's going to have to suffer through this, because